two ways I want to take this conversation. Part is there is a lot of interest that I've had, I'd say over the last maybe 4 years in spiral dynamics. There's a couple maybe key topics that have really helped me evolve some of my thinking and figure out where am I? Like what are some of the things I'm trying to express with words, but maybe don't have words for yet, right? What are the underlying emotions when I go to say something and I'm like, ooh, this isn't going to resonate with people that knew me 6 months ago. And so spiral dynamics gave language to some things that I didn't have language for previously. And I know that's a topic that you've done a lot of thinking around, some great podcasts with your dad around. But I also do want to talk about, some of your upbringing as well. Many people will know Rob Bell as your dad. So I want to go into both directions. But Trace, I want to give you the opportunity right off the top to just set the scene of the work that you're doing now. And then maybe also give me some flavor for what got you originally interested in spiral dynamics.
Yeah, so I've always just had this curiosity about the world ever since I've been a little kid. Like I was always really curious about the way things worked, why they worked the way they did. I was really interested in politics growing up. I loved studying political systems. I studied political science for my undergrad. And I always just had this metaphysical curiosity about the world, this metaphysical curiosity about consciousness and how it works and why do some people grow? Why do some people stay in the same place? I was always fascinated by psychology. So I've always just had this really natural curiosity about the world and just this wonder and awe about this experience that always feels like it's driven me in all of these different directions and had me pursue all of these different areas and learn about all these different things. So I always was studying this stuff, always super interested in this stuff. My dad was teaching. I was always fascinated by my dad's work, and I always thought his work was awesome, and just seeing the way that he was living his purpose out in the world and the stuff that he was teaching. And I knew that he was teaching spiral dynamics. I knew that it was this framework that kind of mapped development, and I would hear him talk about it. I didn't really fully get it or understand it growing up, and it had never been fully explained to me. It wasn't until later in my life that he actually sat down and explained this model of spiral dynamics, which is this human development model that maps how human beings have grown throughout history, how humanity has evolved, and also how we grow as individual humans, how we actually develop in our own lives. And it just clicked so many things into place for me. It just helped me understand politics better. It helped me understand the culture wars better. It helped me understand my own growth better. It helped me understand why certain people keep growing and keep kind of getting a bigger worldview as they mature, and why some people, it feels like they actually get like their lives get smaller and they get a smaller worldview. So yeah, it clicked so many things into place and helped me understand, helped me see the world through this new lens. And it just really intuitively resonated with me. So I started collaborating with him on spiral dynamics work. We did that 4-part series called Me, We, Everybody. That was a big hit. I didn't expect it was going to resonate with as many people as it did. I knew it was powerful material, but the amount of people that afterwards reached out to me and were like, "Oh my gosh, this completely changed my life. It completely changed how I see everything." I was really blown away with the impact it had and how much it resonated with people. That I was like, I want to start working with people on this. I want to start teaching people about the way that I view this and how this model and how this kind of way of viewing the world can be so helpful and healing. So I started doing that. I started running my own course around spiral dynamics and also a bunch of other courses. I had a bunch of other stuff that I was interested in. So I started working with people directly. And then I met my partner, Tina, who was also involved in this work. And we started doing courses and events together. And then we started doing work with organizations because we were getting heads of organizations were reaching out to us saying, "Hey, we think the spiral can be really helpful for our organization and just helpful for our culture." So we started working with organizations, and that kind of took off. So that kind of took off our work in not a totally new direction, but working in a different setting rather than with individuals, working with organizations. So that led us to start our organization called Open Aware. which is a educational platform, and our business in which we teach this content to organizations and individuals, and that's where all of our work is under. So that's kind of a long answer to your question. What is my work right now, and how I got here?
I know I like the context a lot, and it shows that the spiral's been sort of part of all of this. So I want to talk about it from a personal side first before we apply it to maybe more broad, like in an organizational setting, or even you can look at entire cultures through this paradigm and through this lens. When you're becoming aware of this, you're having these conversations with your dad, and you're starting to just think of your personal life trace and like, oh my gosh, this just resonates so deeply with me. What were the initial things that you sort of spotted that like, oh, this is how it kind of maps to my life and some of my development? And then also, since you've been aware, what did it start to like pull you into, and like how has it helped you grow? Because I'd like to hear it from just your vantage point in your life before we go any broader.
Yeah, fantastic question, and I love that we're starting here. So the like I said, the spiral dynamics maps how humanity has evolved and also how humans evolve in their individual lives, and it kind of maps these stages that we grow through in development. And there's two really important concepts with the spiral that I think are really important to start any spiralated discussion, which is none of us are only at one stage. We're all a mix of these stages. Sometimes people fall into the trap of trying to label like one person at only one stage or seeing themselves at only one stage, but it's really missing out on the nuance and complexity of who we are as humans. Like I see these stages as different aspects of self that we have different mixes of. Each individual person has different mixes of these different aspects of self. And each particular stage has a way that it looks in health and also a way that it looks in unhealth. So no stage is more important than another stage. There aren't stages that are better than other stages. Each stage in its health is saying something extremely important and profound about what it means to be human. It's making up an essential part of being a full integrated human. So I was able, when I learned the spiral, I was able to see all of these different stages, and they're given color names. So it's like stage beige, stage purple, stage red, stage blue, orange, green. I was able to see all of these different stages as like in me and parts of me, and some I was living more in health and some I was living more in unhealth. And I was able to see in my life like, oh, that was a phase in which I was really living a lot of stage red unhealth. I was really displaying a lot of unhealthy red. I was really trying to to have value by proving I was better than other people or having power over other people. And then as I started to mature, I started to move into healthy red, which is a power that actually calls other people into their power. It's not about a power that tries to have power over others. It's actually about a power that tries to have power with others, and it actually empowers others. So I was able to see all of these different stages and all these different aspects of self and see the ways they were coming up in health and unhealth. And seeing the ways that they were coming up in unhealth was really pointing me to the material that I needed to heal in my life. And really, it helped me trace back to certain childhood experiences and certain trauma that I experienced that showed me, oh, that's why the unhealth of the stage keeps coming up. Like, I need to work on this material. So it really just gave me this like kind of like roadmap of my own development, and just seeing how it's not about racing to these higher levels of development. That's not actually what healing and growth is about. It's actually about going back to the essential kind of foundational aspects of being human and seeing, how am I living these foundational aspects? Am I living these foundational aspects in health? And if I'm not, how can I get to the root of these childhood experiences that are causing me to live the unhealth of them? So yeah, it really just gave me this like really kind of broad and specific overview of my own development and all of these different aspects of self and the way that I was living them. And it just helped me foster a lot more health and just had me cultivated a lot more awareness of my own, how I was showing up in the world and my own internal state.
Yeah. So the Enneagram did that for me at first.
Yes.
Where it just, okay, this gives me, so I would say when I first came across it, I was realizing people give this illustration often where when you hear about your Enneagram number, you kind of feel naked and you want someone to shut up and like stop telling you or stop explaining it to you. If you're reading it on a laptop, you want to close the laptop because you feel exposed. And I had that moment. And then at a certain point, the conversation sort of got stunted for me around the Enneagram, where I was like, okay, I kind of feel like I generally understand where I am, but I don't necessarily know what this is telling me is when it comes to growth. Like, what am I going to develop beyond this? And there's stages of health and unhealth there too, that you can read some really good like teachers in that space. But I think the spiral dynamics conversation hit me in the right season where I needed something that also was like, oh, beyond just some of the temperament stuff and, you know, my want to show up and like be shiny instead of authentic or whatever. How do I continue to grow and look for ways? And I'll tell you the first thing that really stood out to me about spiral dynamics, and you can help me expand on this, but there is a back and forth. I almost explain it like a pendulum between individualism and community, like engagement that happens within the spiral. That's really important to note. And what happened for me, Trace, is I was in church world for a long time, and you see that a lot in what color is that? That's blue, right?
Stage blue.
Yes. So I saw this kind of groupthink that happens in stage blue, and I could point to a lot of, like you mentioned, there's some really good that happens there.
Yeah.
But I also, I've joked about this in the last month. I didn't know what the word agency was until I was almost 30, because there's not a lot of talk about making your own decisions, about like your space in the world, and I needed that. And I almost had to leave that community to find it. And so when I was trying to figure out how to articulate that, spiral dynamics came in like, oh yeah, that's kind of what happens naturally. You were in groupthink, now go figure out agency. And I actually feel this swing back in where I'm going, oh, I can show up in community much better, having that level of agency and knowing that I'm showing up as, you know what I mean? Like I hold space, but also that helps me hold space for others. So can you speak to that a little bit? Because that's part of what's happening in these stages, in these colors, in the spiral. There's community, there's individualism, and they kind of play off of each other.
Yeah, God, I love that so much. Thank you for sharing that. A really key concept of the spiral is this phrase called transcend and include, which is as we transcend as we grow and as we transcend the level that we were at, when we grow in health, we actually include the good and beneficial aspects of what came before us. So there's also transcend and repress, which is what we see from a lot of people, where they grow beyond the community or the level they were at, but they repress the healthy aspects of what came before them. So can you
go into that a little bit? Actually, can I have you just go further into that? Because I think it's worth like, what is it? What does that look like when someone transcends and represses?
Yes. Great. I think a real world example would be really helpful here. So if we start at stage blue, like you said, so stage blue, historically, this was the stage for humanity when humanity started to develop agriculture and civilizations and organized religion. Stage blue is about providing order and direction for a community and kind of having these overall values and belief systems that the whole group and people live in. And so stage blue, a lot of people are in and came from stage blue environments where they came from kind of an organized religion world, a church world. And like you said, there's a lot of health in that, in providing order and direction and safety and belonging and community. Now, the unhealth of that is the tribalism, the us versus them attitude, the kind of creating that dualistic world where there's the people that are in and there's the people that are out. Now, people that are from that kind of organized religion world, when they grow in health, like you do, they transcend, they gain a sense of agency. So they transcend the kind of need to like conform to the group structure. But then they also include the healthy aspects of community, or are able to actually show up in community in a much more healthy, up-leveled way, where they can actually now engage in the health of community which is a blue thing, a health of community with this sense of agency and this individualism. So they like take the health of both of those and actually grow in the health of those. Now, someone who is transcending and repressing might grow out of their religious kind of setting, but they completely reject any sense of community. They like completely just become totally individualistic. I see this sometimes when people who grew up in religion and then they become like militant atheists, like they just become like so hardcore atheist, and they like they
went and
kind
found
of
another tribe that
always they have another tribe, and it's like you can just feel the pain in it, and they're constantly reacting against their upbringing. They're constantly having to try to like dismiss and kind of just go at their upbringing, and like you can just feel how much pain is in it, and they haven't made peace with their upbringing. They haven't transcended and included. They've transcended and repressed. And sometimes what you see is people that grew out of these structures then are like lacking some of the order and the structure and the discipline in their lives. They're kind of just like floating around. They have a really tumultuous relationship with any sort of authority. So they kind of just float around because they haven't included the healthy aspects of that stage blue. They just completely repressed all of it. Now, it's not a perfect example, but it's just one way to kind of see that dynamic play out where, I mean, I've worked with a lot of people who have, when we teach them the spiral, they're like, I came from a very blue environment and I just completely repressed all of blue. And I see now that integrating the health of stage blue, the kind of having the discipline in your life, kind of having the ability for delayed gratification, some of these healthy values that's not about confining yourself. It's just about having that kind of healthy foundational structure in your life. They're like, oh, I see how I've repressed all of that. And now that caused a lot of dysfunction in my life. So now I can actually go back. I can now look at my upbringing more objectively and actually see, oh, okay, there was a lot of unhealth in here. There was a lot of trauma maybe in here, but there also were some healthy aspects, and there were some values that were imparted to me that are actually necessary to integrate and embody. I just love what you said about moving into agency, and then maybe actually being able to engage in community, because that like embodies transcend and include. And the other thing that's coming up for me is just I think this is one of the reasons why the spiral is so reassuring and so healing for a lot of people, is because a lot of people grew up in these blue communities, and then they grew beyond it. They grew beyond their community. They started thinking differently. They opened to a kind of bigger worldview and more perspectives. And they were like, why is no one else around me growing? Why do I feel kind of alienated in this new perspective I have? Like, why am I kind of, there's almost this kind of like self-gaslighting that comes in of like, wait, am I maybe the crazy one? Why is no one else thinking like this? And then you see the spiral and you're like, oh, this is actually a very natural process of development. And this has actually been documented by tons of data and evidence and these brilliant developmental psychologists that's just a very natural progression. And the people that stay in stage blue and don't grow, there's nothing wrong with them. There's plenty of people that just stay where they're at. And there's nothing wrong with you for growing and opening up to more worldviews. So I feel like there's this like kind of deep comfort and this deep kind of reassurance that you're on the right path. And this is just a very documented thing that a lot of humans have gone through.
One of the analogies that has been most helpful to me is this idea of moving north to south versus east to west, because it's so much easier. If you just think geographically for a second, if you place somebody on a map, like let's say you're in Arizona, it's going to be a lot easier to move to a state east or west of you than north or south. And why is that? Because if you're in Arizona and you move to Texas, okay, the weather's relatively the same. There might be some, different trees or something, but relatively, what to expect when you move east to west. If you are in a blue stage and then you realize, like, for whatever reason, your community, you just start, I need to leave this community. It's going to be a lot easier to move east to west, find another group that still has like staunch thinking on things, strict boundaries, whatever. Like, it's basically the same landscape, but it's a different camp. You moved east to west versus when you go north to south and all of a sudden, like, we just did this. I told you before we hit record, but we moved from Austin to Pittsburgh. When you make that move, dude, the weather, way different. The landscape, way different. So then you start to feel that like, okay, we're going to a completely different place. Some people won't be able to go along for this journey. This is going to be more of, what are we going to find up there, than it is going to be this, like, I definitely kind of know what to expect. So I don't know, that's always been helpful for me when I think of transcend and include, is even the move away from community for a little while. It's okay. Like, it's okay that space is needed, because you need time to process, and falling in love with even some sort of wilderness space, and knowing that there's a long history of people that have embraced that and then been able to come back and serve in a better, more helpful, healthier way, is it's just worth looking into, because you do, like you said, you can look at brilliant people who have studied these systems for ages, or you can just look at the lives of specific individuals and you see that laid out. Like that way of going about things seems to be just a part of life. So anyway, that I think in images, and that's the one I think of when I think of what you were just saying.
I love that so much. I'm so glad you said that, because another concept in the spiral is horizontal versus vertical growth, which horizontal growth is when you grow actually within your stage, which is a really important thing, because you can be,
it is
like, we need the health of all of these stages embodied. We need healthy blue in our world. Healthy blue is super, super important. Like, a great example of healthy blue is youth sports. Youth sports gives kids who are exhibiting a lot of stage red, which is all about independence and autonomy. Stage blue sports gives kids a team that they need to be kind of responsible for. They have a position, they have a place within the system, they have teammates to answer to. It's not all about them. Like, you see, youth sports gives us a lot of important values. So we need all the health of these stages. So moving to the health, moving horizontally in these stages is super important. And then there's also vertical growth, which is actually growing to a new stage or a new perspective. And that's super important as well. But for a lot of people, they actually need to engage in horizontal growth before they can engage in vertical growth. Like, getting healthy, embodying more health at the place that they're at is the prerequisite and the foundation for actually moving to a totally new developmental level or a new stage. So I just love that kind of imagery of moving horizontally versus moving vertically.
Let's talk about misconceptions for a second. You brought up one earlier, and I think as I got a little bit more into my study, which I still should go way more in depth than I even have, but one of the ones that I had to get past is, it's so easy to think of, and you've done a great job of making sure you say, like, hey, this isn't better than that. Mm-hmm. But when you hear stages, when you hear like progression, it's very easy to jump to, oh, I just need to get to like the next color. And then like, oh, and then I'll be elevated like ahead of whatever was behind. How do you keep yourself from thinking that way, or putting yourself in a position of like, just because even the way we're talking right now, I could imagine someone hearing it and being like, that sounds,
it feels like hierarchical.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. It can, and this is one of the common misconceptions about the spiral, and it's just one of the tricky things about discussing something that evolves, like you said, progression and stages. Is it's often kind of like, the misconception is it's making some sort of value judgment about each one, and value judgment about each stage. And that's why I feel it's so important to always stress that the health of each stage is just as important as all the other healths of each stage. And the health of each stage makes up the whole thing. There isn't a health of one stage that's more important than a health of another stage. So no matter, and this is one of the paradoxical things about it, and this is, and my interpretation of it, is that in order to actually grow and develop, it actually requires us to go back to the earlier stages and live them fully in health. We can't grow and develop unless we're living the earlier stages in health. So like, for example, the first stage is stage beige. So this is where humans were first at. So this is like the first humans, and stage beige is just purely concerned with the survival of the body. Stage beige is just
water, shelter.
how do I
Give
get
me
my
the
food,
basics.
water, shelter, just basic survival stuff. A lot of people are not living their beige in health. A lot of people are not taking care of their bodies. They're not sleeping properly. They're not tending to their emotions, which are part of the body. They're living their beige in extreme unhealth. So like beige, healthy beige is the foundation. Their healthy beige is so extremely important. So if you want to grow and develop, it's actually about integration. It's actually about going to all of these first stages and making sure I'm living all of them in health. So I don't see the spiral as linear. I don't see it as, we grow to this higher stage and then we're like better than the lower stages, the people at lower stages. I see it as this fluid kind of, all of these are within us. And it's all this it's this spiraling kind of mosaic of colors within us that we're constantly working on the health. And it's growth is about integrating and becoming whole by acknowledging and living the health of all of these different stages. So that's I think is a really, really key point. And it also requires to look at this in a very kind of paradoxical lens, because the spiral model was developed as a developmental psychology model. It's not, and the founders were clear to say this, it's not saying that the later stages are better than the earlier stages from a developmental perspective. The later stages are able to hold more nuance and complexity, kind of like 8th grade isn't better than 3rd grade, but 8th grade holds more complexity and nuance, and you're just dealing with more, it has more room for complexity in it. That's a very important, I think, principle to acknowledge and come back to, is that you can hold more complexity and have more room and have a bigger perspective, but that doesn't mean it's valued more than something that doesn't hold as much complexity. But it is paradoxical, and it is.
3rd graders and 8th graders are both learning math. It just, what you learn in 3rd grade is going to impact the type of math you can do in 8th grade.
So, absolutely. Exactly. And you have to go through 3rd grade in order to get to 8th grade. So no one says like, oh, 8th grade is like way better than 3rd grade. If you're in 8th grade, you're just a way better person than if you're in 3rd grade. It's like, oh no, third grade was actually an essential piece of this whole kind of this whole ladder, or this whole puzzle. So that's an analogy I like a lot, is just because you can hold more in one level doesn't mean that it's valued more or worth more.
You see people too that have a hard time giving, I've said this on the podcast already, like previous versions of themselves grace. Mm-hmm. I've experienced that, right? In those moments where you receive an invitation from life to transcend and include, to change your thinking. As you go about doing that, it gets really difficult to look at how you used to think and say you were doing the best with what you had. Mm-hmm. Spiral dynamics gives you a way of kind of going into some of that and going, no, that was necessary. And was everything that happened there like good or perfect? Well, no, that's not what we're saying. We're just saying that was necessary. Like, it's okay to give yourself some space to not have it all figured out. It's a pretty big part of life, is just the reality that you're doing the best with what you can, hopefully. And that was a kind of a weight off my shoulders in a way, as I was looking at some of this. I want to run a few things by you. You've done a really good job, actually, of just naturally hitting on some of these colors. Let's go beyond beige, and I'll hit on a couple that we haven't hit on that take us from beige up to blue, which we've already talked about. So it goes beige, purple, red, blue. So purple, if you're thinking about that, it's the level that's focused. Well, like we said, it was individual in beige, get the food, the water, the shelter. Purple, go community, tradition. So people in this level are like strong social bonds, rituals, maybe. I mean, what would you add there? What's a good example, Trace, of stage purple?
Yeah, so purple was the first formation of tribes. So purple is this like kind of tribal life. Purple was the introduction of spirituality into the human experience. Purple was humans in stage purple started to look around at the world, and they could see that things were changing in the environment. You know, the moon was coming in the night, coming to the sky at night. Sometimes the plants were more plentiful. They could see the environment changing around them. And they started to develop these animistic kind of magical beliefs about the universe. So there's these forces in the universe. There's a moon god. There's a sun god. There's a god for the plants. The world is governed by these mysterious spiritual forces, and we can actually, as humans, relate and interact with these forces. So this was the realization of that there's this interconnectedness in the universe. There's this magic to the universe. Stage purple was the introduction of storytelling into the universe. The world around me is changing, and now I can tell stories about why it's changing. So stage purple is all, I love stage purple because stage purple in health is about that, the way that we connect to the wonder and awe of this experience, and the way that we connect to the magic, and the way that we have that, we cultivate that sense of wonder and awe and kind of mystery, and the way that we tap into our imagination and our storytelling capabilities. So stage purple in health is this beautiful kind of inner child, kind of just seeing the magic in the world. Stage purple is not about believing in like specific moon gods or sun gods. That was the way it looked developmentally for humans at that time. But in health, when we integrate it, we're integrating that connectedness to the universe and that wonder and awe about everything.
There's things that I can't explain that make me just go, whoa. And just my personal story, in blue, I lost a lot of purple. It was like, I for sure know what's beyond, right? You got this systematic theology. All of a sudden you can explain all of what used to be wonder. And so there's this way of integrating these things that you return to. I've said this before, like at first as a communicator, I could explain all these things about God. Then you go into this space where it's like, I don't even know if I have a label anymore. All I know is this thing is so big and beautiful and wonderful and awe-inspiring that I just want to sit there for a while, right?
Yes.
So
well said.
Great job explaining purple. Purple goes to red. This level is all about power and ego. So people at that level focused on their own desires and interests. Maybe they use force or aggression to get what they want. And notice what we're both saying, because in beige, if it's food, water, shelter, you get those things covered, and all of a sudden you can almost like come up for air and you can look at things more than just your immediate needs. Then you go to red because you're like back into this, well, with that knowledge, now power, ego, like this gives me a leg up in some ways. When I think of red, man, I have actually a hard time thinking of everything that is red in health. And you might have touched on that earlier, but can you retouch on that? Like, what is it in red that's so essential?
Yeah, this is a great question. And red is definitely, I think, one of the trickier stages because the unhealth of this stage was so grotesque and it's so damaging. And a lot of us...
And apparent.
And a lot of us have experienced trauma at the hands of unhealthy red. We had Donald Trump is the quintessential unhealthy red leader. Like if you want to understand Donald Trump,
hat to prove it.
If you want to, totally. If you want to understand Donald Trump and his motivations and be able to predict all his behavior, study stage red and spiral dynamics, and it will explain Donald Trump to a T. And this is actually one of the big problems with, the Republican Party thinks he's like stage blue, stage orange, when he's actually stage red, which is why he's giving them so much trouble. That's a whole other conversation, but very interesting, big example that we've all experienced actually trauma through his presidency because of his unhealthy red. So stage red historically was the development of the ego. In these stage purple tribes, humans still didn't really understand themselves as an individual self. It was kind of still seen like their self was an extension of the tribe. Stage red is the development of the separate self, the ego, and it's the realization that, us as individual humans can exercise our own independence, our own will, our own autonomy. And the tribal life became a little bit too constrained for some humans, and humans realized, if I can demonstrate my own power and take what I want in life. So this had a lot of unhealthy manifestations. Historically, this created these kind of warlords and dictators. But if we really focus in on that essence of that realization that I, as a human, have independence and autonomy, and it can exercise my own will and can actually demonstrate my own power, there's a lot of health and a lot of beauty in that when it doesn't involve taking power away from other people. Like, I think a classic example of healthy red that I like to acknowledge when I see is just anyone who's putting out art into the world or anyone who's putting out their work into the world. Like to put out your art or your work in the world took healthy red. Like that took your own will and your own independence and your own autonomy. And it had to take empowerment to put yourself out in the world as an inherently vulnerable and kind of scary thing. And that took some bravery and that took some healthy red. And healthy red was the birthplace of leadership. So when you see leaders who are leading with their power and they're showing up as powerful individuals, but they're also calling other people into their own power and calling other people forward into their healthy red. That's what I think healthy red looks like. It's using that gift it's a gift in this human experience to have independence and to have our own agency and to be able to exercise our own empowerment. And when we're doing that in a way that's actually inspiring others and calling others forward, that's what I believe healthy red looks like.
Well said. Two examples came up in my head as you're talking about healthy red. I have a friend, she's going to be on a future episode. Actually, she recently wrote her life story. She was adopted at 17, was in a house that would have been her parental structures. I would say they were definitely, her mom was red, right? And so she starts coming to the church, Trace, that I was a pastor at the time. And I grew up in a very blue home. And I would say we were almost like ships passing in the night in a way where I have some really like powerful spiritual moments with the two of us, like praying together and just church stuff, right? But I see this like evolution happening that's really fun to point out now, where I see her leaving this hyper red space and finding, like, the language she will use is she found like God. She found the community at the right time in her life where like blue just was like this sanctuary for her, right? She got to be in this environment where there was rules and authority, and all of a sudden there's tradition and there's just like, but in like a really beautiful way, she found it. And at the same time, I was like, man, I've never really felt this agency, right? Like I told you earlier, I don't have language for that level of independence. And if I look at what was lacking, some of it was healthy red and being in a blue environment where that had to be like stinted, or put me on a stage at church so I can like perform for you. And that's the only version of red that exists. So I say both of those examples because I think there's probably people listening that you're starting to be able to figure out where you are a little bit. Like we're probably talking to some people that are in blue environments, or maybe we're about to get to orange green. I think there's that as well. Anyway, it's interesting how as individuals, we're also born into families that are at different stages in this, and all of that starts to intersect, intertwine. And then you could even go up another layer to go, okay, American culture, based on the state that you lived in, the area that you're in, all of that starts to add different dynamics to this. But that's what it got me thinking about, specifically when it comes to, getting into red, blue, and then we'll get into orange in a second. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, that's so well said. And what's coming up for me is another important concept in spiral dynamics, which is this concept of center of gravity, which center of gravity refers to, we have a center of gravity stage that is the stage that primarily influences our orientation towards life. But we're also a mix of all of these different stages. So like someone that, is maybe has a center of gravity, like Donald Trump, for example, very center of gravity stage red, also has some blue, also has some orange, which we're going to get to. Also, all of these and the people you're talking about and yourself, like we're all like we have a center of gravity kind of orientation, and then we have a mix of all of these different places. So for people that are listening, you might be finding, oh yeah, I'm kind of around this place, and you're probably also relating to these other stages because all of these are in you in some way, and their health and unhealth. I just like that concept really adds a lot of important nuance to me in this whole discussion, because again, this is a mosaic within us of these colors that's showing in all different ways.
Yeah, and let the mosaic, it's fun to talk about it in the culture perspective, or you think about churches or whatever it is, your upbringing, but also when you start thinking of center of gravity, and even if I say this podcast is just meant to be a growth mechanism for me and anybody that wants to go on this journey with me, like think of the center of gravity for you. Don't start trying to just figure out where everybody else is at. This is not really, yes, it's fun as like a thought experiment and you can talk about it, but truly where so much of the growth actually happens is saying, this is like self-reflection and what's going on with me and in my center of gravity naturally, and how can I entice myself or tempt myself into further levels of growth. So we talked about blue quite a bit. I'm not going to harp on that. Let's go to orange. Orange is this return to some sort of like individual achievement and success. So you left the structure of maybe belief and rules, authority, and you're going, I'm going to prove, like, I'm going to compete. I am going to pursue wealth. Maybe it's status. It's in like all of those. I see the American dream a lot in orange. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but there's a lot of that. What I like that we've hit on several times. I've asked you, what's the health in it, because I think that's a really beautiful thing to see. Talk to me about what's happening in stage orange if we're in a healthy place.
Yeah, so I think it's important to go back to historically what was the development from stage blue to stage orange when stage orange was introduced into the human experience. So when stage orange came about, stage orange was the introduction of using logic, using rationality, using evidence to inform beliefs and decisions rather than believing whatever the power structure said. So historically, in stage blue, absolute truth was just viewed as whatever the church was saying, whatever the government was saying, whatever the power structure, the authority structure at the time was saying, that was just unquestioned, and it was just believed, oh, well, that's the absolute truth because the authority is saying it. When stage orange comes into experience, humans start to realize, oh, wait, we can actually go out in the world and observe and analyze things. We can actually accumulate data and evidence, and we can actually start to study the world. And this was the introduction of science. We can actually start to use science to come to truths and beliefs about the world. So this was incredibly empowering for people at this time. And this is why it moved to individualism again. And the spiral oscillates from going individual focused to community focused. So stage beige, like you said, individual, purple, communal, stage red, individual, stage blue, communal. Now we're to orange, individual. And this was incredibly empowering and freeing for so many people, because rather than just having to subscribe to whatever the authority structure is saying, it's now about actually engaging in processes and methodologies to discover truths and to discover things about the world. So this was stage orange, was the birth of the scientific revolution, the age of enlightenment. It birthed so many scientific and philosophical movements, because now humans were able to use these new capacities of the mind and capacities of their psyches to analyze the world and come to truths. So stage orange in health is so important. Stage orange in health, we can give thanks to for like all of the modern technology we have, so many of the luxuries that we enjoy today. The fact that you and I are able to talk through this computer screen right now, technology, medicine, our increased life expectancy. Stage orange just was this explosion of technology and advancements. Capitalism was a stage orange creation. Stage orange was the first world-centric perspective. So stage blue was called an ethnocentric, which is only me and my group are the only ones that matter. I can only care about my group. Stage red before that was egocentric. I can only care about my own ego. Stage orange was the birth of world-centric, which is now I can actually now care about the whole world, and I can actually see that the whole world, every human matters in some way. So democracy came with stage orange. Because it was like, wait, we can't only give the right to vote to people within our own group. We actually have to extend the right to vote for everyone just because they're citizens. So stage orange brought a lot of more inclusivity. It brought a lot of empowerment. It was this kind of freeing from the kind of constraint of the authority structures at the time. So the health of this stage is the ability to think rationally and think critically. I think of stage orange as like when I go down like a rabbit hole of learning something, like when I just give myself permission to just dive into a topic and just learn and accumulate a bunch of information and data about it, and then reflect on it and think about what are my thoughts? How do I synthesize this information? That's using healthy orange. The unhealth of orange, which I think we're experiencing so much in our world today, because stage orange is a major center of gravity for the United States. Stage orange is very mind dominated, and stage orange becomes very hollow and soulless because it only lives from the mind. So stage orange and unhealth views the world only through this lens of logic and rationality. And if something doesn't fit within this box of logic and rationality, it dismisses it. It completely dismisses it. So the unhealth of orange dismisses all of those beautiful purple aspects of wonder and awe and magic and mystery. It's like, I can't quantify this. I can't put this in my box of logic and rationality. And this is what you see when people move into that kind of like militant atheism, and they just start, there's nothing going on here. It's just bleak nothingness. There's no higher intelligence. It's just this kind of cold, dark world, and we're just these meat suits. That's moving into some unhealthy orange, because you're kind of limiting the world to just this lens of logic and rationality, and everything needing to be quantifiable. But stage orange is a really, really, I feel like I could talk about this one for hours. Stage orange is a really, really important stage, because it's the center of gravity of our country and a lot of the world. And a lot of our problems right now and the things that we're dealing with can be explained by the unhealth of orange and excess of orange.
Yeah, I see that in many different aspects. So two things that it brings up for me. One, I want to talk about trust, because I think when you get to orange, there's some elements, and I've had this question a few times, not pertaining specifically to spiral dynamics, but just in people's development, where they're going, it feels like we're at this boiling point where people just don't trust each other anymore. And I think that's kind of partially a result of this orange thing happening. Yeah. All of our systems, our authority structures, our traditions, all of them seem to be breaking. And you get into this place where you're sensing some agency, you're realizing you can do research, you can go look things up. You know, the leaders that you so trusted, you're the same as them. They just took a seat of power. You realize all this stuff and you go, okay, so then who the hell do I trust? Like, are any of our systems worth keeping? And I've had that conversation over and over and over again, because trust feels in many ways broken, and it can leave people feeling like, okay, so now what? We just all become islands. We're all just floating on our own, thinking our thoughts. And like you said, super mind dominated. Like, we're going to somehow solve the puzzle just up here in our heads. Totally resonate with that. So I want to go there for a minute. The other thing it brought up that I'll just say quickly before we dive in is, this is my personal experience with orange. So I spent 11 years in Kenya growing up, and very communal as a country. So high love for just quality time with people. Consumerism is just not the same when you're in an East African developing country. Blue would definitely be a large center of gravity. But I noticed something when everything happened in my church experience over the last 3 years, where a lot of people, when we were talking about like lateral movements, or maybe you just move it, let's just say even outside of spiral dynamics, I saw a bunch of people get frustrated with church, get frustrated with systems they were handed, and get really angry. And then that was it. Personal experience is like, there's certain things that I just feel like I felt like I could move through certain things quicker. And one of them was this. Like, I felt like there was some elements of orange where I was just like, I'm slightly uninterested in you.
Yeah.
Like some people would call me a bad American because consumerism and these types of things, they were always topics where I was just like, I don't think you're going to like my perspective. Anyway, or I could go a bunch further into orange, but that's the other thing it brought up. So let's go back to trust. Are you experiencing that sort of lack of trust? And this might be a weird question or a weird way of phrasing it, but where do you have hope when it comes to that? Because as a country, if we're sensing that, what can we do, healthy orange moving into green, to be like, to invite people into some level of hope?
Yeah, great question. That your piece about trust, spot on, and you said it perfectly with we're living in our own islands. I think that's an unhealthy orange. Unhealthy orange is only living from the mind, and we don't feel our interconnectedness and our oneness with each other through our mind. Our mind is excellent at splitting reality into pieces and compartmentalizing these pieces and breaking things down and reducing things, which again is a very, very helpful skill in its health. We need that's a really important skill. But when we only live from that place, we're viewing life and the reality through this lens of separation. So the unhealth of orange, we've all become these in the Western world. We've become these just like brains on these heads on sticks. And this has been a lot of I was very, very mind dominated. I went to UCLA, which was like the most mind-dominated, most stage orange place ever. And it was incredibly painful in a lot of ways. It felt like it was really lacking that, like the deeper aspects of life. And it really honed my healthy orange skills, my ability to learn and study and interpret data. And it really polished my orange skills. But the unhealth of it just felt so crushing that it actually was a major player in my spiritual awakening and my kind of awakening to deeper parts of reality, because just living the unhealth of orange so viscerally and feeling the loneliness and the emptiness and that kind of existential despair that comes from only living from the head made me realize like, oh, I gotta connect into my heart, and I gotta connect to the deeper parts of reality, because this is not how I want to live my life. So I think we're dealing with that as a culture right now. Is we have this whole paradigm that's become so mind oriented, and that cuts us off from our ability to trust others and connect to their hearts. So that's where I think that trust piece comes from. And then where I see hope, I mean, one area I see hope is just that, like, what the spiral shows us is that consciousness does have an upward trajectory. Things are actually moving towards more wholeness and integration, and things are moving in a better direction, even when it doesn't feel like that, even when it feels like, and there sometimes are setbacks, and it's sometimes, there are things that, there are times where it feels like, we're not moving forward. But what developmental psychology shows us is that things do move towards more wholeness and unity. And when we look at history, things have been getting better over time. So that's one thing that gives me tremendous amount of hope. I mean, we could talk about this for hours, but I'm seeing the way that the excess wealth that capitalism has created is actually, a lot of that wealth now is just starting to go towards kind of righting some of the wrongs of capitalism. And it's actually starting to go towards bringing about a kind of post-capitalist system that's more built on equality. I've seen this psychedelic renaissance and this kind of psychedelic revolution that's happening right now. And those experiences give people incredible peak experiences and mystical experiences of oneness and unity. And that's extremely exciting. So there's a lot of different things that give me hope, but I also have days where I'm like, fuck, man, this whole thing feels fucked. But overall I really do feel more hope, and just feeling like there's a deep trust in the whole, there's a deep trust in the kind of nature and flow of the universe, that it actually is moving towards better directions, which feels like a great transition into stage green, because that stage green is a corrective readjustment in a lot of ways.
Okay. Before we go to green, I want to go personal for a couple minutes, because I told you I want to talk about two things. I want to talk about spiral dynamics, but also want to talk about your personal journey. And you brought it up there, being heavy, orange dominated, mind dominated, and going, all right, there's got to be something more than this. You grow up in a house with parents that knew the spiral, also having to lead people that are in multiple places, right? Like there's even just your dad as a teacher and like the style that he's going to bring. You're going to have people that are very mind dominated, and then also like lean into spirit and lead into there's something bigger than us. So I just want to know, because I'm also, I mean, I was a pastor's kid, I've grown up in these types of environments. Like, how do you feel like your upbringing has uniquely positioned you and the way, like the place that you live from? What do you really take from some of those childhood years that, and the way that you see the world?
I mean, just watching my dad growing up, I just learned a ton from watching him. I remember one of the things I always admired most about my dad was that my dad was always asking people questions. Like no matter where, no matter where he was at in his career, no matter what he was doing, no matter who the person was, I always watched my dad engage in the world with such curiosity and always trying to learn, always asking people questions. And he just showed up with just this like deep curiosity in all of these situations. So I feel like, I feel like the best thing my parents gave me was just this real attitude and orientation towards always learning and always just exploring, and then the freedom to do so. Just the freedom. They never pushed any sort of, I never considered myself Christian growing up. They never like pushed any sort of Christian ideas or beliefs on me. I had this kind of spiritual curiosity about the world and the spiritual curiosity about life and just these kind of existential questions that I was just always allowed to explore. And yeah, I just felt like I grew up in this environment that really fostered that learning and fostered that exploration. So that was really, really influential to me. And I was always very curious about spirituality and I always had these intuitions about spirituality. But I didn't have that real like breakthrough awakening experience until I was older. So spirituality kind of existed as this thing that I was just kind of curious and kind of felt things about. And I thought my dad's work was fascinating and interesting, and I loved his work. But I didn't really have my own like direct lived experience of what a lot of the words were pointing to. So I went through college and I really felt the pain of Orange, and just like the pain of living from the mind. And it was actually my senior year of college that I had my first mystical experience, my first awakening. And I was like, oh, that's what people are talking about when they talk about spiritual awakening. Like you're awakening to the fundamental oneness of life. And it's a very real, visceral experience that's hard to articulate and hard to explain. But that was a really transformational part of my journey, was having this attitude of curiosity, always learning, having these kind of intuitions about the nature of reality, but then feeling the pain of being so mind dominated. I'm an Enneagram type 7, so I'm a head type. And with a lot of 8 in me too. So I viewed the world through my head. I viewed the world through thinking. I was just very mind dominated. And then, feeling the unhealth of Orange, feeling the unhealth of, and feeling the pain of what it feels like to fully just only live from the mind, really spurred that realization that I need to go deeper. And then my awakening came right after that. So I think that's kind of an answer to your question. It's a fantastic question.
Okay, so I have one more, and this question either totally works or it totally flops, and that's cool. I had some big life change moments that happened around 15, 16. And I was trying to do the math because it feels like for you as a kid, and this, I could have the math wrong, but you're probably like 13 or 14 when Love Wins comes out. So this is a very hyper specific.
I was 13. Yeah.
13.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a hyper specific question. And I only ask because of my background too. So it makes me curious. Like you end up hyper mind dominated. And I kind of wonder, like, do you feel like it's also partially in response to the way that all of the blue culture responded to your dad at such a formative time in your life? Because I have some things like that, maybe is definitely very different, but I can kind of like nod my head in agreement when I was thinking about it. I just wonder like how you feel like all of that shaped you watching. Like, honestly, his ability to continue to evolve has helped me feel like, okay, sweet. Like, even though there's some things I'm leaving behind. Like I can keep evolving. And so when I listen to you guys and your podcast and you talk about spiral dynamics or whatever, and keeps elements of like healthy blue, I'm like, man, that's so encouraging. But also for you to experience quite a bit of like, maybe you were guarded from it, but like the nasty of blue, how did that impact your thinking moving forward? Because you're at a really formative stage in your life at that point.
Yeah, great. Oh my God, amazing question. So yes, my parents did a really good job at guarding us from a lot of the nastiness of blue and just even blue in general. Like they purposely moved us to one of the school districts that was like the least religious, and it was the area of West Michigan that people cared the least about who my dad was. So I always felt kind of separate from the church world and separate from all of that. I obviously knew about stuff that was going on. I remember when Love Wins came out, I remember having this seeing the reaction to it. I remember having this feeling of like, oh my God, it's just so stupid. Like the reaction to it is just so stupid. Like like the book is amazing, but like, that's really like getting people that upset, that saying that heaven and hell aren't real places. Like the idea that people could be that upset about the idea that heaven and hell aren't real physical places, and there aren't like huge percentages of the population that are going to burn in suffering forever. Like that was like a concept for me that was just like I had actually, honestly, to be completely honest with you, I had this kind of like frustration that we needed to even be that close to that world. Like there was always this frustration that like, I don't connect to these people. I don't like why is my family even feeling the pain from this level of unhealthy blue? Like it felt on like I had a little bit of beef with the universe about it, of like I feel so divorced and so far from that way of thinking that the fact that people that making that kind of noise, like even like affecting my life in any way, kind of felt weird and sort of just like, what? Like, it's just so ridiculous. So I definitely, I mean, I love you asked this question because I'm now even making connections in my own life. As I got older, started to become really, really interested in politics. And I started to become really intense about progressive and left-wing politics, and started to see a bunch of ways that things weren't working. But I really created in a very dualistic sense that there were good guys and there were bad guys. There were the good guys, there were the people that were fighting the good fight, they were fighting for progressive policies and all the people on the left. And then there were all the bad people. There were the conservatives, there were the Republicans, those were all like the horrible people, and those people just need to die off. And we just need to and I really created this dualistic sense, which is a very common theme in the first 6 stages of the spiral. Often they view their perspective as the only right one, and they view everyone else as wrong. So they're constantly trying to argue their own perspective as the absolute truth to the other stages, and don't see that everyone's at different perspectives, and the health of all of those is necessary. So I fell into that really kind of dualistic view of the world, that there's good guys and bad guys. And a lot of that was probably influenced by viewing that there were like sort of bad guys attacking my dad about Love Wins, like there were just these ignorant, uneducated, like just kind of morons that were going after my dad for saying something that I just thought was like kind of like, duh, like heaven and hell aren't like real places. It's about the state of being that we create in this life,
I don't even know if he was that blunt at that point. It was like, I just.
Oh, totally. He definitely wasn't that blunt. He definitely wasn't that blunt. It was just fascinating from my perspective because, when I saw the premise, I was like, I was totally supportive of him and thought it was awesome that he was doing it. I was like, yeah, if anyone's going to spread this message, it's you. Like, I have no problems with him doing it. I'm just like, wow, that's really like angering that many people. Like, if you're part of a religion that literally has the idea that most people are going to burn in hell forever, like it just feels like such a like goofy, soulless kind of belief to hold. So my rational brain at the time just couldn't really deal with that. And I think some of the pain fueled that orange part of me to become mind dominated and really create the world in different categories of there's people that get it, there's good guys that get it, and then there's all the people that don't get it. And we just need to like win the good fight against the people that don't get it. And my healing and my growth has really like got me to a place where I don't view the world in that lens. I view the world as like we're all these complex humans who have so many different factors that influence us, and we all have these different perspectives, and we have different trauma and different life experiences, and there's not the same mechanism, that the same ego mechanism that is in people that demonize my dad is also the same ego mechanism that is in me that demonizes those people. Like, seeing myself and all of these different people really brought, really allowed me to see that we're all humans navigating this. And it's not the world isn't split into these categories. But yeah, fantastic question that got me reflecting in a lot of really great ways.
Thanks for going there. I know that sort of stuff can always be vulnerable. It can work or it can't, but I appreciate you just being willing to talk about it. You brought up something really good there too about ego. That ultimately, if you're going to do more, whoever's listening to this, you're going to do more looking into the spiral. We've used some good language around finding your center of gravity, using this more as a tool for yourself versus judging or labeling others. So there's a lot to be said. That can definitely be an entire other episode that I'll do at some point. But addressing the ego at every one of these stages and being able to see through a lens where you can see yourself removed from just what your ego wants to project is one of the biggest realizations you'll have in all of this. Like, the ego standing in the way of the ego is often the ceiling that you got to break through for any sort of growth that you're wanting to experience. And so addressing that is huge. We might be a couple minutes over. Trace, do you have a few more minutes?
Yeah, I got more time. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I do too. So let's go back into this. We have green, yellow, and turquoise. And so hit us with green and what that looks like. And I'd love to hear in your personal journey too, what that looked like, taking you from some of the mind dominated into that space that green holds.
Yeah. So green is such an important stage. So historically, green came about when people started to realize that, there was more to life than just thinking about things rationally and just accumulating material things and having success. Life is actually about relationships and emotional intelligence, and life is actually about love. Ultimately, is what green's about. Life is about love for self and love for others. So stage green brought about the movements like the civil rights movement, the LGBTQI movement. It brought forth these progressive movements and these movements that aimed to right the wrongs and the injustices of the blue and orange systems. So I look at green as this collective sinking into the heart. Green is about having love for every human and every being and the planet, for just because it is. You don't have to work for love. You don't have to prove that you should be loved. Green is about just loving things just because they are. So green is this. Orange is head. Green is heart, and green moves into the heart in this really profound way. So the health of green. Oh my gosh, the health of green is so important. The health of green is all of the social justice movements that are aimed to, like I said, right the wrongs and injustices of the systems that we live in. Stage green is all of the inclusivity movements, all of the awareness of marginalized groups. So stage green is a really, really important stage and changed a lot of the discussion and changed a lot of the discourse. And like I said, it was like a corrective readjustment of some of the excess of orange and blue and the hollowness of that. It was this return to what it means to be human, what it means to love with your heart, what it means to live from the heart, what it means to have nourishing, deep connection and relationship with others, and have that deep, nourishing connection with your community. And viewing Sage Orange took that world-centric perspective of orange and went way deeper with it. Stage Orange was this world-centric perspective from the head. Stage Green was this world-centric perspective from the heart of actually having love for every single being and having love for the planet. So all of the environmental movements, all of the ecological movements were Stage Green.
Trace, for you personally, what was the move? Are you getting frustrated with orange, or was there a certain injustice or a trigger thing that got you to start thinking in a more green way? What starts to maybe tempt your center of gravity to shift a bit?
Honestly, just moving into the heart really was where stage green became real, was just really moving, connecting with my own, starting to own and acknowledge my own emotions and starting to have compassion for myself and whatever emotions I was feeling, starting to like really like sink into the heart, like actually like, and sometimes this was really physically, like actually feeling my heart in my chest, like what is my heart feeling like right now? And starting to increasing my own self-love, like really starting to love myself, really starting to heal all of the patterns and conditioning that was causing me not to love certain aspects of myself. Increasing my own self-love allowed me to love everyone else because I was able to see myself in everyone else. Shadow work was a really important part of green. So exploring the things that I was most judgmental about in others were often parts of myself that I wasn't willing to acknowledge or own. I created a shadow out of them. So shadow work and just like really healing that shadow and help me have love for other people and help me have love for myself. So yeah, meditation, yoga, reading, just really consciously setting the intention to live from my heart and feel. Enneagram was also really helpful for this too. I don't know if you know about tri-type on the Enneagram, where you have like, you have a head type, a body type, and a heart type. So I learned I'm a 7-8-2. So really starting to embody and acknowledge my 2 was really helped me come into green. Like that part of me that really just wants to care for others, and the part of me that really just opens my heart to others. That's where a lot of my transition into green came from.
Fantastic, man. Okay. So green takes us into yellow and then yellow to turquoise. When I was highlighting where I feel like we needed to spend the most of our time, I felt like it was between blue and yellow. So we're getting towards the end of that. And then we can briefly touch on turquoise too. But yellow, if I understand it correctly, which I've done less study here, but it's focused primarily on system thinking and complexity. So people start to get into multiple perspectives. You get way more comfortable with uncertainty, with ambiguity. What else should we be thinking of when we're thinking of yellow? And that would be what if orange was individual, green is going back into communal. So yellow might be taking us in some ways back to some individual.
Yeah. So yellow is the first. So the first 6 stages from beige to green are called tier 1. And then when we get into yellow, these are now called the tier 2 stages. And the reason that the developmental psychologists, Claire Grave and Christopher Cohen, called them tier 2 is because they saw this leap from green to yellow as such a monumentous leap in perspective. And there were some qualities of yellow that were different from green that were so important that they literally made a new category called tier 2. And I think the thing that's really important, like you said, with stage yellow is systems thinking. Stage yellow is now able to really see the world from this perspective of systems. And the thing about systems is that you see that every part is necessary for the whole of the system. So one of the things that unhealthy green can fall into is unhealthy green can still see its perspective as the only right one and start to try to argue its perspective to all the other stages, because stage green doesn't understand systems thinking yet, or it doesn't understand it. It doesn't understand it as deeply as stage yellow does. So one of the things that stage green can oftentimes have a real problem with something like the spiral, because stage green can be like, well, we're all equal. We all have equal value. We can't, like the spiral is like saying that some people are better than others, which I know we already discussed and talked about. So stage green can have problem with understanding that you can actually talk about systems and level of development without making a value judgment about each one. So this is what I find from people that are really in green, is they oftentimes can have a negative reaction to the spiral because they interpret it as like making value judgments about the stages. And stage yellow is the stage that's able to see, all of these parts, all of these stages make up this whole system, and no part is better than another. So stage yellow moves into a lot of paradox. That's something that when I started to really explore these stages, I started to integrate and feel a lot more paradox in life of, like we were talking about this paradox earlier of like, later stages hold more complexity and nuance, but that doesn't mean that they're better or valued more. That takes a bit of a paradoxical, you kind of have to hold a paradox a little bit there, that some of the tier 1 stages aren't able to hold. By the way, something you'll also notice, I'm sure that people listening have noticed, is as we've started to discuss is like from stage orange on, we've been talking a lot more about these stages. These stages are getting a lot more complex and nuanced. We have a lot more material to talk about, like as opposed to stage red. So you see, as we're moving in, a lot, it opens up a lot more. It gets a lot more complex. You also have different developmental theorists. Now we're in the stages where developmental theorists kind of disagree about some of the differences between like yellow and turquoise, which we're going to get to. Some of this stuff gets a little bit more theoretical because not as many humans are at stage green and stage yellow. These are still being constructed and still being made as we speak. So they're not as like rigidly defined, and the lines aren't as rigidly defined. So that's a little bit of a tangent in another direction. But for stage yellow, stage yellow is really able to, is the first stage is able to see the spiral and see how each stage in the spiral is necessary and the health of each stage is necessary. And the way that I teach the spiral is that stage yellow, when we move to stage yellow, that we're moving to integration, which is the recognition that we need to consciously work on embodying the health of each tier 1 stage and also work on healing the unhealth of each tier 1 stage. So yellow is this deep realization and the importance of each part of the system, both externally and internally. That's how I think about yellow.
Man, we could spend, literally.
I know. I was having that same thought. I was like, we could go hours on this. It's hard to like keep it.
I'm glad that we're doing this because I'll just make it clear. This is a taste test. For some people, you're already into the spiral. You can go do more work. And maybe today's just a little like nerd out reminder. For others of you, if this is new, go listen to Trace and Rob talk for multiple episodes on this stuff, or there's some great other teachers on the spiral and would love to, maybe I'll even give some resources away when this episode goes live so people can check that stuff out. Let's quickly talk about turquoise and what can be expected there. Before we go to it, you did mention something that's interesting when they studied this from a really high level, because you can look at, we're talking about America being orange primarily, or that's where a lot of our center of gravity is. When you look back at human history, there was a lot of time where humans spent it all in like one color primarily, like a lot of, and you can just see it. And it feels like with Trace said it earlier, we're on a computer right now. We're talking from different states, thousands of miles away. With the internet, with access to information, all of these different things, we've sped up the pace at which we get to some of these stages seemingly. That's an interesting piece to look into. Yes. I found that to be one of the most fascinating parts of studying some of this, is how quick the pace gets. And once you start to notice some of it, it even is like tempting you to further develop and to grow. If you're in a healthy space, like you want to start to integrate some of this stuff. And so it gives language to a lot of things that maybe people were feeling previously, but maybe they were kind of, in a sense, hitting the ceiling and not knowing where to go. I find that fascinating. So anything you want to chime in there and then take us into turquoise?
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned this because I think that's I love stressing this point when I talk about the spiral, which is when we look at the developments of the earlier stages, like there was like 40,000 years between something like stage red and stage blue. And then like between the stage orange and stage green, it was like a couple hundred years. And between stage green, we're already seeing, a lot of yellow aspects in society. Like that could be like 100 years or something. So we see actually this development happen quicker and quicker, which is another thing that gives me incredible hope, is that progress and evolution is not happening as slow as it did in the past. It's actually happening way quicker. And like you said, is that because of the way that we spread information? Is that because of actually the nature of consciousness? And that's just kind of built into the intelligence of consciousness? I don't know. It's probably all those factors, but really a kind of cool aspect that things are happening much quicker. And this stuff is just becoming permeated in our world at a much faster rate.
Can I say one thing before we go to turquoise? Because I will say a fear I have of a society like ours in America being very head dominated is you'd look at it at this, you'd go, oh, spiral dynamics. I understand it cognitively. I understand it in my head. And there's a lack of a sinking into what we were talking about with green, like sinking into your heart, coming into the present moment, like being here, that needs to happen in order for further integration. And so even if you sort of feel like you understand systems thinking or complexity, our center of gravity can still very easily, because we're in a culture that's dominated by orange, like we're only thinking about it. We're not necessarily living there. And I'll only speak for me. I sense that the temptation is to do a podcast with you, talk a bunch and nerd out about a topic like this, but not live from my heart, not come from a place of authenticity, not create brave spaces where people can really wrestle with this stuff, because you know enough now to be cognitively dangerous in a conversation, but not necessarily continue to transcend and include, because you have language that makes you feel like you might be mentally ascending beyond where other people are.
Oh, amen. It's the biggest trap of this work, is having the intellectual understanding, but not the actual lived understanding. This is why, I mean, just the importance of actually engaging in real practices like meditation, yoga, even stuff like dancing, healing in community, like this, engaging in the kind of conceptual, intellectual stuff is awesome, and having that foundation. But then how is that actually pointing us back to getting in our bodies and actually doing the practices? This is something that I have to watch out for myself, especially because I'm so head oriented. I always have to come back to how am I getting in my body? How am I living this through my body? The course that my partner Tina and I created is actually called Living the Spiral, because the way we teach the spiral is about, rather than focusing on it as an intellectual exercise, we focus on how do we actually live the health of each stage, and how do we actually heal the unhealth of each stage? Because this model is only helpful if we're actually living it rather than knowing it.
So good. Okay. So round us out with turquoise. Give us just a taste test of what that's like. It's not many people finding their center of gravity there, but I think it's very intriguing to at least know what's going on.
Yeah. So purple is turquoise. Turquoise is a stage that, like you said, not a lot of people are at. Some aspects of it are theoretical. We're now in stages where there's a lot of disagreement, and again, this is a lot of it's speculation, and it's kind of being constructed as we speak. But how I understand turquoise is this is the mysticism. This is the understanding yourself as one with God and human at the same time, or one with spirit, whatever word you like to use, spirit, source. This is where we have this balance of being a human, and also this balance of knowing ourselves as the divine. So this is turquoise is where yellow can still be kind of still staying in the head. It's like, or yellow can still not be fully moving beyond the mind, because it's still understanding the world through systems, and it's still understanding the world through kind of concepts. Turquoise is this move totally beyond the mind, awakening to who we are beyond the mind, awakening to our true nature. And it's then this living life in this holistic, kind of integrated manner. I know that this one's hard to even fully articulate. I feel like I've dove into a lot of turquoise practices, like some practices, again, like meditation, self-inquiry, yoga, psychedelics are very turquoise, and just having these peak experiences that awaken us to who we are beyond this ego construct. Turquoise is really when we really start to awaken to who we are beyond the ego. And then I think the aspect of it that's becoming really constructed as we speak is then how do we as humans live and operate in culture and society with this knowing of who we are beyond the ego. That's the thing that's being as humans, we're writing turquoise right now because, humans have had awakenings, humans have woken up to who they are beyond the ego. How do we now actually set up a society, and how do we actually set up structures informed by this understanding of our connectedness and oneness and unity. That's the most interesting question to me. And that's gonna, yellow and turquoise are the next 100, 200 years of human development. I think all the changes we're going to see in the world are going to come from moving into green, yellow, and turquoise. And so many of the solutions to our ailments as society are coming from these stages. We're currently you can see our culture right now trying to figure out through orange the solutions to the problems of unhealthy orange, but the solutions are actually going to come from moving into these deeper aspects of reality, moving into the heart, starting to understand the world and systems, and awakening to who we are beyond our ego identities. And that's where solutions are going to come that are going to truly build a really beautiful world.
There's the last couple of things I would bring up as we're starting to wrap it. It's interesting because power is something that clearly, countries have governments and presidents. You were interested in politics. When you think of these stages, and then you think of our power structures, when you get into some of these colors, when we talk about green, yellow, turquoise, there's also some development happening there where if your ego is decreasing, your likelihood that you're going to take a power position also sort of in some ways decreases. Not necessarily if you've perfectly integrated all the things, whatever, but when you tend to think about a super loud red, clearly that person's going to get a bunch of attention over someone who may come preaching a message of peace and talking about being present, right? So we have a lot to grapple with as a society about how could we have leaders that are better yellow, turquoise, green thinkers, because how they rally people when it's not as much about us versus them gets way more difficult. And we don't have a lot of models looking back that we can go, oh, and it worked for them and it worked for them. And this is how it, yet some of the messages that resonate the most deeply from thousands of years ago are messages from people that were way ahead of their time, thinking in green, yellow, turquoise perspectives. So it's the truth that resonates in so much of like our lived experience is from people in these stages, yet they weren't in positions of traditional power. And that's something I consistently think about.
Our systems are so built around narcissism, and they're so toxic and they're so unhealthy that when you have people that are like moving into yellow and turquoise, those people aren't throwing themselves into the middle of those systems, because that would just be like it would just make them sick. Like you can't even be there when you can't even be around the narcissism that is in our government and our politics, because it would just like I said, it would just make you sick if you're at those levels. So yeah, it's going to be the big thing that's going to be fascinating to see is as more and more humans start to move into these stages and these ideas start to become more popular, how does that start to actually really like affect our systems and change our systems? How do these ideas change our systems? And the thing that's really exciting is it doesn't actually take a large percent of the population to move into these higher stages to have a huge influence on our world, because the people that move into these stages are oftentimes the people that are influencing the ideas, and they're the thought leaders, and they have a lot of influence, even though they're a small percentage of the population. Which is really exciting. So we don't need the whole world to move into yellow and turquoise. We just need like 5 to 10%, and that can actually radically change things. And that 5 to 10% number is not perfect; it's an estimation. But we just need more and more people to see this, and that will influence things on a structural level, which is really exciting. But yeah, this is so fun to talk about and so fun to theorize about. Yeah, we could talk hours.
Yeah. Last thing I'll say, we don't need everyone to model these things in the exact same way, because there's still a uniqueness to all of us, like a flavor that we bring, your past experiences, you're integrating your own experience. So sometimes I feel like when we talk about this stuff, people get nervous, like, are we all going to just end up these like meditation gurus, what blah, blah, blah. And like, okay, there's some ego in that thinking, but also like, no, there's space for all of us in the way we express ourselves to continue to integrate these things. And like, you'll sink into, again, it's kind of a heart posture of just like, I'm going to live open-handed, and it'll be expressed in vastly different ways. Like, I nod my head in agreement to everything you say, yet at the same time, probably how each of us lives some of this stuff out is entirely different. And that's what makes it also beautiful. So with that being said, I want to finish up with just kind of two questions. Who are your sort of favorite spiritual teachers right now? Like, anybody that you would recommend us go check out. That could be books to read. And I use this language of growth mechanisms, meaning just what are the things that you're most learning from? And it could even just be art, or it could be an area of intrigue, something that's piqued your curiosity lately. Like, tell us some people maybe to go follow and check out, things to read, and then tell us what's helping you grow and expand.
Oh, great questions. So some of my favorite teachers, there's a teacher named Rupert Spira. I think I've talked about him on my dad's podcast before. He's a British spiritual teacher. He's a teacher of presence. He just speaks with such this kind of poetic nature, and it's just the way that he just points back to the truth of who we are. He teaches with such simplicity, and it feels so poetic. And his words have always really, really resonated with me. Pema Chodron is a Buddhist teacher. She's amazing. She's been really teaching me how to have inner compassion. I love Eckhart Tolle. His teaching of just being present. I mean, the simplest truths in life are coming back to the simplicity. So the teachers that are teaching these truths in such a simple but profound way are the ones that really resonate with me. There's this social philosopher named Daniel Schmachtenberger, who he doesn't have any books, but he has a bunch of YouTube and podcast appearances. Amazing, incredible thinker. Ken Wilber, the integral philosopher, he's influenced me a lot, and he's influenced a lot of my understanding of the spiral. Those are Daniel Schmachtenberger and Ken Wilber are more like kind of philosopher types, and the other people I mentioned are more kind of just like spiritual teachers. There's this woman on YouTube named Christina Lopes who is great. Those are the kind of the main teachers in my life right now. Also, my girlfriend Tina, she teaches me a ton, and she's like one of my favorite spiritual teachers that I learn from on a day-to-day basis.
So good. Well, I give everyone a opportunity. This is the only recurring question on the podcast, but I have a little list that's a growing trace of things that I have to go try or go do. So one of the previous people on the pod had me do like an hour and 10-minute meditation from Joe Dispenza. I got to go do a fire walk. I have to go to Philly and eat a Philly cheesesteak with one of the previous guests. There's quite a few things on my list now. I have to write my spiritual story of like, where am I right now in my spiritual journey? So with all of that in mind, I'm going to give you the chance to like, what's one thing I should add? It could be anything from a food I need to go try to a book that you'd say, no, add this to your list and read that. It could be an experience to seek out, but is there something that you would add to my list? I call it like my growth gauntlet list.
Oh man, a great question. Have you been to the Bay Area?
I haven't, man.
This is my favorite place in the country. I love the Bay Area. Just experiencing this area, experiencing this land. The Bay Area was a major origin point for a lot of higher consciousness. Stage Green really the Bay Area was a major origin point for Stage Green, and just the natural beauty here, and just seeing the views, seeing the bridge, just being in this area, I think is like really, really special. So that's what's coming up for me, is just to explore the Bay Area, explore the beauty of Northern California. I might even extend that to Northern California. I find Northern California just such an incredible, beautiful place that I'm so grateful to live in. So that feels like that should be on your growth gauntlet. And can I say one more thing about the spiral? Because I just wanted to add this little piece at the end. Because I think this is a helpful truth to come back to. I love this quote. There's this quote by this guy named George Box, who was a physical physicist, and which is, all models are wrong, but some are useful. And I love living by that quote. The spiral is not a perfect model. The spiral is actually ridiculously simple for how complex and nuanced the human experience is and how complex and nuanced all of us are. So the spiral is not, there's so many aspects of reality that aren't going to line up to the spiral. There's so many ways that it doesn't actually move in the way that the spiral says. It's a very helpful model, but at certain points, it's actually like good to just set the model aside. And it's a helpful lens to view the world through. But it doesn't, in reality, it doesn't actually work as a total absolute truth that everything fits into, which I know for a lot of the listeners, that's obvious. But it's helpful to not fall into any sort of idea that stuff is going to perfectly map onto it, or it's going to be able to explain everything. It's a really good engaging with models to actually hold them loosely and use them when they're helpful and set them aside when they're not. So I just wanted to say that real quick because I kind of feel like I have to when I talk about any sort of model.
I almost feel like we should just cut the podcast right there because that's the perfect way to end.